was never really a big Halloween person, mostly because I grew up without many friends. And once I passed the age of 10, I couldn't use the excuse of going with my mom anymore. And it's not like I had friends to go with. So, this last Halloween, I was 14 years old. I do have a little sister who's only 8. So my mom went trick-or-treating with her. My one really good friend Steve already had plans and I didn't want to impose. So it didn't seem like I'd be trick-or-treating this year. I felt a tiny part of my explode with happiness on the inside. When my mom asked me to stay home and hand out candies. Now I felt like I had a job to do that didn't involve me trick-or-treating alone, like a loser. My mom left my sister at about 6 o'clock, about an hour after she got home from work. She told me to expect her back around 9. So I was relaxing on the couch in the living room, watching the scary movie marathon on AMC, and occasionally entering the door to give candy to the kiddies. And while doing that, the kitchen phone began to ring. I remember the ringer was set so loud it actually made me jump. I picked up a phone and the other end remained silent, except for a bit of fumbling and background noise. Sounds you would expect when somebody's holding a phone. I think I said hello about 5 times before the person on the other end hung up. I just knew it was somebody pulling a Halloween prank call on me. What else could I do but ignore it? That worked well enough for the next few minutes of watching TV, answering the phone until the phone rang again. Same unknown number coming up on the caller ID. I wanted to see where this was going, so I picked it up once more. This time I could hear a very faint breathing on the other end. "Alright, Steve, I know it's you," I said into the phone. They hung up. By this point, I didn't want to say I was scared, but I was for sure a bit uneasy. It was a long time before that phone rang again. I was getting later, darker, and the doorbell seemed to be ringing less and less. I was watching the original Friday the 13th when it happened again. The sound of that phone ringing had become sickening, as I knew who it would be, or rather, I didn't. For some reason I gave in again and picked up, and once again, silence. Other than the faint breathing and fumbling of the phone, it was like this for almost half a minute, before they finally spoke in exaggerated deep voice. "I'll be paying you a visit tonight." I had enough of this joke. I told them to fuck off and hang up the phone, promising to myself not to pick it up again. I would say about half an hour later, out of the blue, all the power in the house was cut. The lights went out. The TV turned off. Complete darkness. I stood up now, frozen in tear, when loud and angry thumping came from the front door. I completely lost it and began screaming like a girl. But there was something coming from outside. Laughter. I recognized that laughter. I opened the door. And there he was, Steven. I shoved him nearly down the steps out of anger. "So that was you who made those dumb phone calls?" I asked. He nodded while laughing. "I didn't sound like you on the phone." "I may hear you do that voice again," I said. "What?" He isn't confused. "I didn't say anything, you idiot. I just called in, did that heavy breathing." I thought he was lying at first, but then my heart dropped. I had him follow me to the fuse box outside. Just as I feared, it had been opened and all the wires had been snipped. I think we ran faster than any Olympic champions back into the house. I called my mom, who told us to stay inside and wait for the police. Who's she then called? The call was traced to a payphone outside of a nearby bar. I still wonder, was this just a dumb Halloween prank gone too far? Or was it a potential break-in? And God knows what else waiting to happen. I don't think I ever want to find out. The trick or treat murder. The year was 1957, Halloween night. A couple was getting ready for bed when the doorbell rang. It was late, but the husband answered the door. Ready to doll add more candy? Instead, an adult wearing a mask shot him in the chest, killing him. Was it a trick-or-treater dissatisfied with the candy selection? Not quite. The murderer, it turns out, was the girlfriend of a woman who had had an affair with the murdered man's wife. The woman convinced her girlfriend to do away with the husband in order to have the wife for herself. We had just moved into our large new house in Mississauga, Ontario, in an area called Winston Churchill. It was Halloween night and my parents, my 4 other sisters, my brother and I who unpacking our stuff in our new bedrooms. We had just finished and we were talking to each other about leaving our old schools and friends behind. My mother called us to do chores. I was really tired since it was 11:30 at night, way past the trick-or-treating bus. We had to do chores now. It seemed to take forever, but when I was done, I decided to go to my bedroom and get some sleep. I heard what sounded like footsteps in the upstairs hallway. Thinking it was my brother or sister, I got up to shout at them for bothering me while I was sleeping, but there, as far as I could tell, there was no one there. I rushed out of the basement when my parents, sister, and brother were considerately working. I asked them all if they had been upstairs, and they replied, no. I was getting pretty freaked out, but I had to believe it was just my imagination, and shrugged it off. As if it had never happened, I went back to my bed, which was now freezing cold. I had to put on my sweater. It was just too cold. I woke up in the middle of the night around 12:30 a.m. After everyone had gone to sleep, I heard this loud banging sound that seemed to be coming from my parents' bedroom. I thought it might be my brother or sister waiting to get a drink of water, but I was too scared to go alone. I was wrong. The banging continued getting louder by the minute. I couldn't get to sleep, so I decided to check it out. I walked into the hallway, and believe me, there was no one there. As I walked in, the banging seemed to stop. I stared at the door only for a quick moment before deciding to go back to bed. After a couple of minutes, the banging started again. I was totally chilled to my very last bone. I tried to sleep again, but I couldn't. Very typical of me. The door to my bedroom creaked open as if someone were pushing in lightly. But it was too dark to see who or what could have caused it. Hey, what the hell are you doing? Who is it? Let me go back to sleep. Very light footsteps began to move closer to my bed. I thought it was one of my sisters until I turned to my side after the footsteps stopped and saw a figure standing next to my bed. A figure at least 7 feet tall. I choked the urge to scream. Nothing came out. I lay there in unimaginable horror as the figure finally said, "Boo," That was when I screamed at the top of my lungs and covered my eyes when my parents thrust open the door to my room and flicked on the light. There was no figure. There was no figure by my bed. I cried out everything to them, the thumping, the figures. My siblings came into the doorway and watched me freak out. I asked my parents if they heard the knocking on their door. Surely they must have. It was their door after all. But they said there was no knocking, not that they knew. They all looked at me like I was crazy, but I know I'm not. They can't just imagine something like that. Something so real.